I'm delighted to extend to you my welcome to State of the Nation 2019 and also to facilitate this session with Minister Fletcher. I'm not going to go through the details of Paul Fletcher's background and CV. It's in the app and you can read that as you probably already have. But Paul Fletcher was my local member as the member for Bradfield for many years, and the one thing that is clear about Paul is his dedication, his hard work and his commitment both to the local community but also to the Australian people. And I'm sure that that will come out from his presentation today. I'm not going to give any more introduction than that. You know, he's the Minister for Communications, for Cyber Safety and for the Arts, and as you'd expect, if you said there was a portfolio where digital is touching all aspects of that portfolio, you couldn't find one that was more directly impacted and with opportunities and risks both presented for us as a nation, then you couldn't get a better one than Minister Fletcher's portfolio. So with that, Paul, over to you. Thank you. Well, please welcome Minister Fletcher.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. It's great to be here with CEDA. I was last in this theatre on Tuesday night, I think, introducing Dora the Explorer and the Lost City of Gold, a children's movie filmed in Queensland, Paramount Studios, and that was a lot of fun. Today, perhaps a little more earnest in the materials we cover. But look, I want to talk today about the NBN and its role in boosting our productivity and economic performance as a nation. And let me give you an example from a company that I visited recently in Darwin, Abode New Homes. This is a company whose business is entirely cloud-based. The owners showed me the digital systems they use to design homes, to order the building materials required, to schedule subcontractors. They have 100 megabit per second down, 40 megabit per second up connection through the NBN to their head office. And on the building sites, their foreman will use a tablet over the 4G network to access the cloud-based systems. Abode requires all of its subcontractors to use its systems for quotes, for invoicing and other interactions, and thus sharing the productivity benefits of this new technology with other businesses in the notoriously disaggregated building sector. What really impressed me was when the owners, Justin and Corinda Gill, told me that they are franchising their business to a franchisee in North Queensland. And part of what the franchisee will receive is access over the NBN and over the cloud to all of Abode's digital business systems. And in my view, this is a good example of how a ubiquitously available broadband network can bring efficiency gains to small and medium businesses. Abode can use a much more efficient cloud-based operating mode because they can access high-speed and affordable broadband in Darwin, and they can give their franchisee access to the same efficiencies because it can access high-speed, affordable broadband in North Queensland. So today I want to start with the proposition that improving productivity growth is a key economic priority for the Morrison government, and one way we do that is by investing to upgrade our national infrastructure, including communications infrastructure. Next, I want to talk about NBN's role in that, in boosting productivity, but make the point that the way the project was initially mismanaged by the then Labor government made it harder to capture the productivity benefits than should have been the case. In the final part of my remarks, I want to highlight the way that we've been able to get the rollout back on track, and in turn, that's now allowing us to deliver some of these long-promised benefits for Australian businesses, including higher bandwidth, better pricing and more choice. So let me start first then with productivity. I think it's an uncontroversial proposition that productivity is key to our economic performance and that we need to boost our productivity growth. Indeed, my colleague, the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, gave a major speech about that just a couple of weeks ago. There is a clear linkage then between infrastructure and productivity, both in Australia and globally. According to the Productivity Commission, 2.5% of our growth in GDP, or about $20 billion, came from microeconomic reform in key infrastructure sectors in the 1990s. Now, a good global example of the linkage between infrastructure and productivity is the US interstate highway system when that was built in the 1950s. According to one economic study, that single piece of infrastructure was responsible for 31% of US productivity gains in the 1950s at a time when productivity was growing in that economy at 6% a year. Of course, numbers we would love to have in today's modern economy. A good local example of the way that productivity can follow from transport infrastructure is the Pacific Highway, where the upgrades between Sydney and the Brisbane and the Queensland border will reduce the return travel time by 5 hours. That means a given truck can travel more frequently and that flows through in terms of productivity benefits. And similarly, communications infrastructure can deliver productivity benefits. And in part, that's very important because communications is a key input for other sectors. In 2016-17, around half the economy relied upon services from the communications sector. It's not hard to think of the many ways in which better communications networks can let businesses work more efficiently and hence improve productivity. Good quality video conferencing means fewer face-to-face meetings are needed, saving time and money on travelling for those meetings. Efficient online processes to place orders, to invoice customers, to pay invoices, all of these can save time and reduce transactions costs. And of course, one change which is making a big difference, particularly now increasingly for small and medium businesses, is using cloud-based applications, just as Abode has done. Business owners and managers can see their critical financial information in real time through cloud-based accounting software such as Xero, and they're relieved from a lot of time-consuming paper-based tasks. Waiting for funds to be cleared by the bank need no longer be a part of small business life with transaction apps such as Osco, which support near real-time payments. That means better cash flow. Of course, for a small business, that can be the difference between collapsing and surviving. And new cloud-based apps are offering more efficient ways for small businesses to operate, helping tradespeople to automate processes in their businesses, such as scheduling jobs with staff and customers. Now, already we're seeing significant evidence that the rollout of the NBN is stimulating the take-up of efficient new cloud-based ways of doing business and, in turn, helping to boost economic activity and productivity. Research by analytics firm Alpha Beta shows that in NBN-connected regions, the number of new businesses grew at 1%, twice the national average and 5 times the rate in non-NBN areas. The research also found that in regions connected to the NBN, the annual growth in digital economy jobs was 4.8%, compared to a slightly negative number in non-NBN connected areas. So a clear link between the NBN and the take-up of digital technology, and in turn, a clear link between the take-up of digital technology and productivity improvements. The Australian Industry Report 2016 found that business investment in digital technologies results in higher productivity, not a proposition that I think will be contentious in this room. And according to the global consultants McKinsey, further adoption of digital technologies could see Australia's gross domestic product increase by between $140 and $250 billion by 2025. In the agriculture sector alone, to pick one sector which is obviously an important part of our economy, the effective use of digital technologies is estimated to allow an increase in the gross value of Australia's agricultural production by over $20 billion. So the theoretical link between NBN and economic and productivity improvements has been understood for a long time. Indeed, in its March 2007 broadband policy document, Labor promised benefits of up to $30 billion a year in additional economic activity from the NBN. The problem, of course, was the yawning gulf between the rhetoric and the reality, a gulf which increased every year through to 2013. Labor's 2007 document promised that it would complete the network rollout to 98% of premises by 2013. Instead, when we came to government, barely 50,000 premises had been connected to the fixed line network. And under Labor, NBN failed to meet every significant operational target, it set for itself. In its 2011 to 2013 corporate plan, NBN Co said that fibre would be available to 1.2 million premises by the end of June 2013. The actual outcome was just over 200,000. Following the 2013 election, we asked the new leadership of NBN Co to conduct a strategic review of the rollout, which revealed that it was in a fundamentally worse position than the previous government had revealed or disclosed to the Parliament or the Australian public. I don't want to examine this melancholy record in detail. I want to really make just 3 points. Firstly, the slower you roll out the network, the slower you are to capture the promised productivity benefits. Under the original Labor plan for the NBN, the rollout would not have been completed until 2024. Under our government, the network rollout will complete next year, 4 years earlier than the previous plan, and already 88% of Australian homes and businesses are able to connect. Secondly, the mishandling of the rollout was damaging to consumer and business confidence in the NBN. To give one example, the previous government announced something called the NBN Interim satellite service. It was a poor service. It used capacity leased from satellites of other operators, and it didn't live up to the promises. Today, the NBN Sky Muster satellite service is delivered over 2 wholly owned satellites and offers an impressive quality of service even in the most remote parts of our vast nation. But sadly, there is still some resistance to using Sky Muster as a hangover from the poor reputation of the Interim satellite service. We're working hard to turn this around, and recently we announced a new product, Sky Muster Plus. It guarantees internet access for non-video applications like banking and general web surfing, even if you've used up your monthly download cap. If, for example, you happen to have teenagers who've been viewing lots of video, and this is an important initiative that's been widely welcomed. Third point I'd make is that productivity benefits are not to be judged in a vacuum. You need to compare the benefits against the costs of providing them. Bizarrely, the previous government never bothered to conduct a cost-benefit study before committing to the NBN, and it's pretty clear they did not have much idea of how much this project was going to cost or where the funds would come from. In the 2007 election, Labor's promise was to deliver the NBN for $4.7 billion. In 2009, they announced a new plan, which came to $43 billion, but they said there was going to be significant private sector investment. By 2010, it was revealed that the private sector was not going to be investing, at least during the rollout phase, and that was the recommendation of the 2010 implementation study. Well, let me turn away from the sorry story of what we inherited to how we've turned this project around and what this means for the long-promised productivity benefits of NBN. Today, there are 10.2 million premises able to connect, 5.9 million connected. In just the last 4 years, we've gone from 1.1 million premises able to connect to that 10.2 million. This year, in a typical week, NBN is enabling connections for some 49,000 premises a week, and each week, nearly 40,000 premises are connecting. And with the rollout on track to be completed next year, our focus is very much on how we can secure the promised national economic and social benefits from the NBN. If this new network is supposed to improve productivity, where is the evidence that this is happening? Well, let me first turn to what NBN means for the supply of telecommunication services to large businesses, the enterprise market. Some might think that companies at the top end of town have the negotiating power to look after themselves, and so there's no need to be concerned about increasing competition in that market. But as ACCC Chair Rod Sims has pointed out, quote, Telstra has dominated the lucrative enterprise and government market as large corporates and government agencies tend to acquire services on a whole of business basis, and historically only Telstra had the ubiquitous infrastructure to meet this need, close quotes. For too long, Australian businesses have been burdened by the lack of choice they face in enterprise broadband services, leading to higher costs and inflexible contracts, which ultimately affect the bottom line. With NBN, that is changing, because now Telstra's competitors are able to supply large corporates using the NBN network, the fibre network, and particularly NBN's Enterprise Ethernet product, which means high speeds delivered over a reliable, high-performance network and with business-grade service levels. Once a particular business location is connected to NBN, that business benefits from having a choice of service provider. It can use Telstra or it can use another provider reselling the NBN network. And of course, it's also open to Telstra to resell the NBN network to business customers. And what this means is that businesses, including very large enterprises, which may need several thousand branches around the country connected, can now access a wide range of competing offers from telcos keen to serve them. And in turn, that stronger competition means businesses can expect lower prices, better coverage and more innovative and better tailored service offerings. Just look at some of the deals recently announced. In March this year, Coles announced a multi-year partnership with Optus Business for digital network and telecommunications services, and that involves Optus partnering with NBN to deploy fibre connections to over 2,400 sites around the country. The other big retailer, Woolworths, informed the market of a deal that will improve its connectivity by converting retail sites onto NBN fibre, in that case through its existing provider, Telstra. Last month, Australia Post announced an upgrade of its telecommunications at over 4,000 sites. As part of this, an Australian-owned company, ComCentre, will be running Australia Post's internet network using the NBN for the provision of wholesale business-grade services. And that upgrade is expected to lead to faster parcel processing, higher service levels, improved transaction performance for services like bank post and passport applications. So these rollouts of the fibre network deliver clear benefits to large corporates. It means they can reduce their costs, use data more efficiently, and in turn deliver more competitive offerings to their customers. And that's productivity in action. There has been some criticism of NBN working with retail service providers to deliver services into the enterprise market. Certainly, the government expects NBN to conduct itself in accordance with the competitive neutrality requirements in the legislation. But it's important to recognise that serving business is part of the original NBN vision. NBN's first corporate plan, published in 2010, set out a product roadmap that included business services and enterprise services. I want to make it clear that the Morrison government regards NBN's work in serving the business market, both enterprise and small and medium business, as a core part of the company's mission. The NBN is a massive national infrastructure investment, and it's very important that we maximise the economic gains to the nation from this investment. And that means delivering cheaper and faster broadband for business as well as for households. And of course, just as important as big business is what the NBN can do for small and medium business. Our Liberal National Government is determined to back small business, a sector which employs 6 million people. And we're doing this through a range of measures, like reducing the company tax rate to 25% for businesses with a turnover of up to $50 million. We see the delivery of better and cheaper telecommunications services to small businesses over the NBN as another important way to help small and medium business be more competitive, innovative and profitable. I've already mentioned Abode New Homes in Darwin. Let me give a couple of other examples. The Forge Pizzeria, a family restaurant business in Ballarat. They've grown from 2 employees to 90 in 6 years, and they've got strong online systems delivered over their NBN connection, such as fingerprint logins and online timesheet management. Similarly, Mayfair Property Management, a Melbourne-based startup, says its NBN connectivity is important so it can quickly and efficiently load up listings and images and help it deliver excellent customer service. There are also numerous examples of technology-based businesses which are now able to locate in regional areas thanks to the NBN's connectivity. One good example is a small independent Australian game development studio called Disparity Games, based in Noosa. High bandwidth connections are essential for a company in the online games sector. Thanks to the NBN, such connections are available in sunny Noosa. We're also seeing more people working from home thanks to NBN. According to research by Alpha Beta, the number of people working from home has increased by 4% in NBN-connected areas compared to 2.5% nationally. And NBN is enabling new ways of working around the country. I recently visited Dubbo, where I met Gillian Kilby. She's a civil engineer She's recently returned from an MBA at Stanford, and she's founded a shared working space in Dubbo called The Exchange, based in the old clock tower and post office on the main street of Dubbo. She can only do this because of high-speed NBN services, a 100 megabit per second business-grade service delivered over fibre optic cable to that space. She's establishing an online network which assists regional men and women who are starting up businesses and providing mentoring and advice to help establish businesses grow. So the Exchange is an example of a co-working space using NBN connectivity. Of course, another way that NBN is boosting the business sector and in turn productivity is by supporting business models which depend on being able to access customers or users over a high-speed connection. Now, of course, that includes businesses delivering video streaming services to Australian households, an absolutely booming market. At the end of June this year, there were more than 12 million online video content subscriptions in Australia, driven by services such as Netflix and Stan. Only 4 years ago, less than 2% of Australians had SVOD, subscription video on demand. Today, around 57% have SVOD. But the impact of NBN extends well beyond entertainment. It supports more efficient ways of operating in a range of sectors: distance education, telehealth, the distribution of content like books or music or information. And the data shows quite clearly that among people who live in an NBN-connected home, the activity levels in these sectors are higher than amongst those who are not connected. In metropolitan areas, NBN-connected users are 1.5 times more likely to use the internet for non-formal learning compared to non-NBN connected users. In regional areas, that's even higher at 1.8 times. Already, the online education sector is big business. More than 1,000 online education providers in Australia, an estimated $3.3 billion of revenue. But as NBN take-up increases, that sector's only likely to grow. So let me conclude by returning to my opening observation that a key reason for investing in NBN was to improve our national productivity. While much of the focus on NBN has been the residential sector, the difference the NBN is making and will make to the business sector is a really important part of the productivity gains it can help deliver. Now, thanks to poor execution under the previous Labor government, those benefits have remained purely theoretical for quite a few years. But today, with over 5.9 million premises connected and the rollout on track to complete next year, the NBN is now making a tangible difference in the way that many businesses, both large and small, operate and the way that they engage with their customers. We want to drive this further over coming years because the NBN is an important part of our toolkit for improving our national productivity and, in turn, our prosperity and quality of life. Thank you.
Now, let's see. Yeah, that's it. That's the red button on the bottom. That's it. Thank you, Minister, for those comments and your enthusiasm also for the topic. We've got about 12 minutes actually for questions, colleagues. So anyone, there we go, and there's a microphone on its way. Could you, as per previous sessions, state your name and your organisation, please, and keep your questions succinct. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Bob O'Connor, Queensland University of Technology. I'd like to turn to the other element of your portfolio related to the NBN, which is cyber security. I guess I'd look at that as the main threat to business productivity using the NBN. Could you give us your thoughts on how we can really address that threat and protect businesses in that regard?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that actually my responsibility is cyber safety, not cyber security. It's a pretty common confusion. Cyber safety essentially deals with the content that is delivered online, because historically content was delivered over a narrow range of networks like broadcast television, and there were a set of classification requirements and so on. We now have the challenge that content is delivered over the internet, over a whole range of devices, smartphones, tablets, computers, and of course now increasingly smart TVs. Look, I'll confine myself to a couple of very general comments about cybersecurity, which formally sits with Minister Dutton in Home Affairs, and also Minister Reynolds, Defence Minister, has an interest because of the terrific work that the Australian Signals Directorate does. The Australian Government certainly recognises that as more and more economic activity occurs over our communications networks, it is very important that we're alive to the threats and that we have processes and systems in place to identify the threats and manage our responses. And we do work closely with the private sector, with critical infrastructure providers, which of course includes the telcos, and we have also a significant focus across government on making sure that we keep our networks secure. It's clearly a part of the day-to-day focus and responsibility of every organisation, certainly every organisation that's alive to the risks that faces it, to have a clear plan in relation to cybersecurity and be aware of the risks and how to manage them.
Thank you. Rowan, just here in the middle.
Rowan Mead from Australian Unity. Thank you, Minister, for your remarks. You mentioned in one part of your speech a glancing reference to telehealth, and I was just wondering if you might give us some sense in terms of the custodian of a key piece of infrastructure, your role in Cabinet, your role in other policy-making areas for effectively advancing the potential of this infrastructure in relation to its potential application. So, for example, in the areas of telehealth, we have I think a world of opportunity that is, evident. We don't need to go into that in all sorts of detail, but often constrained by existing reimbursement models, patterns of activity, patterns of regulation that come from other areas of government, which actually prevent us from fully utilising this vital piece of technology in an area that I think is, represents a real opportunity for amenity. And I was just wondering your role in sort of proselytising and seeking change in other areas to that end.
Thanks, Rowan. Look, it's an excellent question. As we get to the point where the rollout is complete, recognising, of course, that there'll be continuing network upgrades and the network will continue to expand with population growth and growth in premises. But with the substantive rollout complete, it allows us to really focus on some of the issues you're talking about. How do we make best advantage of this network? And that will raise different questions in different sectors. And clearly one sector is health. Recently, I mentioned in my speech that I was in Dubbo. One of the other things I was doing in Dubbo was joining Stephen Rue, the Chief Executive of NBN, to announce the new Sky Muster Plus product, which is a new way of delivering services over the satellite. And we did that together with the Royal Flying Doctor Service, who are increasingly using the satellite network to support telehealth and consultations to people in more remote areas being delivered by medical professionals located either in Dubbo or in Sydney. But as you rightly say, it does require some changes to the way that health service providers organise themselves. And so it has to be a bit of an iterative process. Here's what the technology allows. Here are the changes that would be needed, and identifying where the blockers are and working through those. So certainly I do work with ministers in other portfolios, looking at how we can best leverage the NBN in segments like health, like education, like agriculture and so on. And I think you'll see us doing more of that over this term of government as we're able to turn our focus away from the mechanics of completing the rollout to being more focused on how we are getting best return from this very substantial national investment.
Any other questions? I have a question from the app. It goes to opportunities and threats. What are the threats to the value maximisation of the NBN going forward, and what will the government be monitoring in order to read and react?
I think there's some critical impacts on the value of NBN as a business. The first is the take-up rate. The business case assumes that in areas where the NBN has been rolled out, between 73 and 75% of households will take it up. And at the moment, it's very much tracking to that number. In each area where the NBN is rolled out, once it's declared ready for service, there's an 18-month period. After that 18-month period, Telstra services are withdrawn, and we typically see, therefore, a bit of a curve in take-up with quite a spike in the last few weeks before that 18-month period, and indeed it continues after that 18-month period. So you can't just look at percentage of homes connected over percentage of homes where the network, which could be connected. You have to weight it for the fact that many of those areas where it's now available have been going for less than 18 months. But long-winded way of saying that connection rate is the key variable. The other is the usual telco metric of ARPU, or average revenue per user. We are seeing that growing, and that reflects essentially the enormous growth in the amount of data that people are downloading. In June this year, the average monthly data download on the NBN fixed network was 255 gigabytes. In 2010, on fixed line networks in Australia, the comparable number was 11 gigabytes. So we've gone from 11 to 255 in 9 years, and that reflects mainly video, Netflix, Stan, YouTube, and all the other ways in which we're using broadband connectivity on our big screen, internet-enabled TVs to watch all kinds of things. And as you'd know, if you have a child or a teenager, the provision of uninterrupted high bandwidth video is a human right, and if it's not provided, it's a very serious matter. So we are seeing huge changes in consumer behaviour, and I think we'll see that continue.
And if I could just add, one of the pieces of work we're doing at Innovation and Science Australia for Minister Andrews is to look at business investment in R&D and innovation. And what's interesting, the and innovation piece that is not R&D related is equal to or greater than the portion that is R&D related, and what it relates to is business model change and business process change, and exactly the sort of business uptake, Minister, that you're talking about. And the reality is that for us to realise the full potential from this network, and also realise our full potential as a creative, innovative nation, we've got to get that non-R&D innovation really rocking, and without it, without this network, the prospect of putting together asset-light, platform-based businesses that work in the cloud that focus entirely on customer loyalty, which is the hallmarks of the really great platform businesses that exist in the world, it would be impossible without a network that provides the bandwidth that the NBN provides. So obviously there's a lot of interest there. Is there any other questions here in the audience? I've got one more, and we do have a few minutes. There's one more, yes?
Thanks, Minister. Tim Dwyer, Sunshine Coast Council. The Sunshine Coast Council is in the process of landing a broadband international submarine cable on the Sunshine Coast at the moment, the only second location outside of Sydney on the east coast of Australia. How do you think the federal government or the business community might be able to be made more aware of that and look at the productivity gains that they may be able to get by thinking about the Sunshine Coast as a great place to do business?
Well, I have no doubt that the very dynamic Sunshine Coast Council will be busy spruiking to potential businesses to relocate. And of course, it does give you potentially a proposition in terms of that alternative physical path to connect into the global internet. Ultimately, of course, what it comes down to is how businesses can see the benefit in their day-to-day operations in terms of cost, bandwidth, and so on. We are seeing, I think, significant changes in the market, significant changes in what people expect, and I've got no doubt that the increase that we're seeing in the number of cables landing in Australia, there's quite a few around the country, is all part of that.
Minister, I've got another one here, and I'm sure you've never been asked this question. What does the arrival of 5G mean for the NBN?
It is a question that people ask pretty regularly. Having committed to what will ultimately be $49 billion in peak funding for NBN. Isn't that at risk because people can bypass the NBN and get their broadband over 5G wireless services? I'd say a few things there. Firstly, the NBN business plan already assumes, as I mentioned, that about 25% of homes passed won't take up the service, and that's because they'll be served by existing mobile services, or they may just say, well, I don't need broadband at home. So there's already built into the business plan a recognition that it's not going to be taken up by everybody, and the economics of it don't depend upon that. I hasten to add, much of the economics of the NBN is what we inherited from our predecessors, and in the words that my predecessor but one minister, Malcolm Turnbull, repeatedly used, as the old Irish joke goes about how would you get to Dublin, I wouldn't be starting from here. We would not have started from here in terms of the business model, but nevertheless, on the specific question of 5G, the business case number one assumes a significant percentage of homes won't connect. Secondly, 5G offers huge flexibility and value because you can deliver very high bandwidth broadband over wireless and over mobile. And so you can see all kinds of industrial applications where you might want to have high bandwidth connectivity, for example, on a robot going into, being used in a mine or elsewhere. My point is that the mobile operators will want to price 5G, well, they want to get a price premium for that. It's not going to be their best business strategy to use it to deliver Netflix into residential customers. And despite 5G's capacity, it will remain the case that fixed networks can deliver more data at a given price point than mobile networks. That's always been the case. That fundamental relationship hasn't changed. And so while there will be a proportion of people who use 5G in the home, undoubtedly, in terms of the bulk of the market that NBN is serving, it will have better economics than the 5G operators will have, and they'll be focusing their offerings on somewhat different segments.
And just to pick up some themes in a question here that relate generally to this topic is, it seems that the priority now for the government is coverage, to get that network effect going to enable the business community and the community more generally to take the benefit. And then can you see a time where there would be an investment in additional capability / speed?
Well, I do make the point that there's continuing CapEx planned to upgrade the network. So under the corporate plan that came out about 3 weeks ago for the 2020 to 2023 period, there's over $4 billion planned to be spent on continuing to upgrade the network. So to give you a couple of examples, DOCSIS 3.1 would let us deliver 1 gigabit per second services over the HFC footprint. And we're also looking at G-Fast, which is a technology that lets you deliver higher speed over copper. So on the fibre to the node part of the network, the copper runs might be 1.5 kilometres. On fibre to the curb, they might be at most about 140 metres. The capacity to use G-Fast and increase the speed of what we can deliver over a service that includes that copper run looks to be quite interesting. So we're very much continuing to invest in how can we upgrade the capacity of the network, and that'll be part of the continuing operations of NBN.
Excellent. Another question? I've got one more here. Looking forward 10 years, what are your thoughts on how we ensure we don't fall behind the rest of the world?
I assume that means fall behind the rest of the world in terms of communications, technology and broadband. I'll assume that. The most important thing in my view is to have competitive markets. In the mobile sector in Australia, we've got vigorous competition. As a result, over the last 25 years, we've gone from analogue amps to GSM or 2G to 3G to 4G and now to 5G. All of that has been the product of the investment of private capital by the owners of those businesses, and competition between them has meant that we're getting those innovations quickly. We're amongst a handful of nations that have been in the lead in terms of starting to install 5G networks, and that is a good thing. So competition is important, and that's true in mobile. Our Labor went off in a different direction with the NBN, where they deprioritised competition and assumed that a government-owned network can solve every problem. We are going to need to rely on and boost competition to make sure that our fixed networks continue to upgrade and stay in tune with world developments.
Okay. One final call for one more question, if there is one. I think you've addressed all the ones that are the main ones. So let me draw this session to a close, and thank you, Minister, for a tremendous presentation and also very, very open answering of questions on issues that are on everybody's minds. So thank you very much, and please join with me and thank the Minister for his presentation.